A very good evening to one and all. In Indian philosophy, it has been explained that the knowledge that we gain are through 6 ways. Direct perception, which is pratyaksha, inference by previous experience, anumana, knowing by example, upamana, testimony of learned people, sabda, postulation or conjecture from insignificant information, arthapatti, the absence of a thing, non-perception or cognitive proof, anupalabdhi. These are the 6 ways which we gain knowledge. And it doesn't stop there. There is the philosophy of Charvahas, which is the knowledge acquired by skepticism or questioning. From the question we receive, there is no doubt that the postgraduates are descendants of Charvahas. On behalf of AO Masai, I welcome all the participants, mentors, and moderator for today's program. Over to Dr. Mirlanini to introduce them all.
Thank you, Karthik sir. Our moderator for session 3 is Dr. Harish. Dr. Harish completed his undergraduate and postgraduate courses from Ragas Dental College. He is a member of International Board for Certification for Specialists in OMFS since 2017, as well as the Indian Board of Oral Maxillofacial Surgery since 2019. He is currently affiliated to Ragas Dental College, Chennai, wherein he joined as a teaching faculty in the year 2015. His areas of interest cover dental implantology and orbital trauma. We welcome you, sir. So let's move on to meet our mentors for the day. The first mentor for today is Professor Suresh Kumar. Dr. Suresh graduated from Madras Dental College and Tamil Nadu Government Dental College. He's a diplomate of the National Board and holds a fellowship in oral implantology, oral cancer management and treatment, as well as software planning and orthodontic surgery. During the course of his career, he has a service record of working at several government hospitals, has been the head of Department of Maxillofacial Surgery at SRM Katanglatur, and has gained esteem as a civil surgeon. He has attended various national and international conferences and has presented keynote sessions at notable forums. He has published numerous articles in various peer-reviewed journals. He was awarded the title of Best Oral Surgeon in 2015 by FAMDent and has contributed a chapter to Dr. Sridhar Prem Kumar's textbook of orthodontics. He is currently a full-time private practitioner and consultant. His fields of interest include dental implants and orthodontic surgery. We welcome you, sir. He will be covering the topic implantology. The second mentor of session 3 is Professor Naveen Kumar. Dr. Naveen received both his graduate degrees from Sri Ramachandra University, Chennai. He has pursued fellowship from Royal College of Surgeons at Ireland, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. He has played organizational roles and has also presented several guest lectures and papers at notable national and international conferences. He has published many articles in journals of repute and has 2 patents pending approval. He is a reviewer for peer-reviewed journals such as Annals of Maxillofacial Surgery, Indian Journal of Dental Research, Sri Ramachandra Journal of Medicine, and Saudi Dental Journal. He is accredited surgical member of Operation Smile, a large worldwide NGO that provides free surgical care for children with cleft and craniofacial anomalies. He is currently affiliated to Sri Ramachandra Institute, Chennai, where he holds the position of Maxillofacial Department Head with membership in Research Advisory Committee and other numerous professional committees. His areas of interest are cleft and craniofacial surgery, orthodontic surgery, maxillofacial trauma, and maxillofacial pathology. We welcome you, sir. He will be covering the topic salivary glands and maxillary sinus. I now request the moderator of today's session, Dr. Harish, to commence the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I would like to welcome Dr. Suresh sir and Dr. Naveen sir. So let us begin the session with related to implants. The first question is,
Dr. Harish, can you be a little louder?
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, little louder, please.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes,
yeah, sure.
Sir.
Yeah. So kindly mention about the evaluation, treatment planning for placement of basal implants. If
yes,
sir, could take up the question.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, very good evening to all of you. And as Karthik said, there are so many ways to learn. And currently with COVID, I think this is the best way to learn. So I'm also very happy to share whatever knowledge I have regarding implants. So let's start with the topic of the day, the basal implants. The first question is pertaining to basal implants. Is it the same implant what we use? They are having a different concept. The implant what we regularly use is an endosteal implant, which is aimed to acquire stability through the crestal cortex, and the long time stability is expected to happen through the osseointegration in the end osseous bone, that is the medullary bone or the cancellous bone. So that is our regular conventional implants. Look at the picture, they have shown what is a basal implant. They are a little different in the concept in the anatomy of the implant, and the concept of osseointegration is also different. So they are called basically basal implants because these are found out basically in cases where there is a severe atrophy. You know, there is a basal bone of the maxilla and mandible, on top of which you have the alveolus. Okay, after extraction, the alveolus starts resorbing faster. Finally, what is left out is the basal bone. So these basal implants are aimed to engage the basal bone, which is more of cortical in nature, offering stability to the implants. So that is why they are known as basal implants. Because they aim to acquire stability from the basal bone or the cortical bone, they are also known as cortical implants. So basal and cortical implants are synonymous. If you look at the evaluation or treatment planning for placement of these basal implants, they pretty much are very similar to the normal implants. The main difference here in the planning is the number of implants, because basal implants are very slender. So you will usually require more number of implants than your conventional implants. But giving the processes is actually sooner in these kind of basal implants, because they engage the basal cortical bone, and so the retention is better. The primary stability what you obtain after the implant placement is actually continuous, and you can do immediate loading in these kind of implants. That's the advantage. So everything, the planning starts like a normal implant through a clinical examination followed by a radiological examination. Check always the mouth opening whenever you use a basal implant, because the drill bits what they give you along with this basal implant kit is usually a little longer. So you need a good mouth opening for the patient to accommodate these longer drills. So always check first the mouth opening. And like the conventional implant, you count how many implants that patient will need, especially when they are missing multiple teeth or the full arch edentulosum. And check for the interocclusal clearance and the force requirement. Sometimes patients will be having implant teeth in the opposing arch. They will exert more force. If they have natural teeth, there will be moderate force. The number of implants are decided based upon the force requirement. If the patient has a conventional removable denture in the opposing arch, probably we can reduce the number of implants. So look at that aspect, which will decide the number of implants required. And radiologically, the same thing what we see for the conventional implants. The baseline radiological investigation is OPG. You see the height of the bone and what is the sinus status in the maxilla and inferior alveolar nerve to the alveolar crest distance in the mandible. We can only roughly assess in OPG. You cannot really quantify because of the magnification factor. So most of the times in basal implantology, because you use pretty long implants, we will need a CBCT to be taken, because as I told you, the drill bits, the implants, everything will be longer and they are inserted quite deeper. So a CBCT to assess where exactly you have to direct the implant. And most of these cases, they will be using the basal implant will be placed in the pterygoid region and zygoma regions. So take a CBCT to exactly know what is the amount of bone that is remaining, what is the status of the maxillary sinus, what is the anatomy of the pterygoid region and the zygoma region, and what is the relationship of the inferior alveolar canal to the alveolar crest in case of the mandible. So these are the routine things and quick things we will have to look into for planning of basal implants.
So I just have
Yes,
two questions as
Yes,
relevant
Harish.
to basal implants. Sir.
Yeah.
Does the concept of osseointegration exist as far as basal implants are considered, sir?
Yes, because they are also made up of titanium. So ultimately, they have to undergo osseointegration. Only thing, it takes little more time because most of the cortical implants are fully polished. So fully polished implants usually will take more time for osseointegration. But the stability which the implant acquires from the basal engagement or cortical engagement will make it stable till it gets osseointegrated. Maybe 6 months or even 1 year, we don't know. But till the time the initial stability, primary stability is maintained because it is engaging in the cortices. So osseointegration has to take place.
The next question would be, ideally, when should we load the processes, sir, as far as basal implants are considered?
For the basal implants?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If
Basal implants can be loaded even on the same day because of the stability.
Okay.
So that is the success of this basal implants. Initially, people were very skeptical to use this because of the totally different hypothesis. But now there are some established studies which are telling that they are really successful. The only problem with basal implants are mostly they are made as a single piece implants. So a screw retained processes is really difficult or impossible. So if there is a problem with the processes, if you want to retrieve it, then we have a problem. We have to cut every places and then remove the processes and then do a reprocesses. But the loading can be done even on the same day. If it is a single tooth, we will do it on the same day. If it is multiple teeth or full arch, we will start it on the same day, but we can finish it from 3 days to 1 week. But you need a good lab for the basal implant processes.
Will it be useful in certain situations where you have a big pathological cavity and it is very difficult to bone graft a huge area? In such situations, will basal implants be helpful, sir?
Yes, Harish. The beauty of basal implants is engaging the foremost cortical or basal bone and to give an immediate loading concept. So this is useful, especially when you don't want to do a bone grafting or if there is any contraindication for a bone grafting, you directly go for these kind of basal implants and then do an immediate loading.
Okay.
It's possible.
Thank you, sir. Can we move to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish.
Can an oral surgeon limit his scope to placement only and the prosthetic work to the prosthodontist? What is your take on this, sir?
Okay. This is a very good question. Like implantology is an interdisciplinary science. So now every branch is doing perio, ortho, oral surgeons, prosthodontists, everybody is doing implant. But the ideal way will be to do an integrated approach. Like you discuss with the oral surgeons to discuss the case with the prosthodontist. The prosthodontist will design the teeth first because ultimately the patient wants the teeth to be in the right place and in the aesthetic place. They are not bothered about the implants. So the prosthodontist has to decide where the teeth should come. Based on that, he will also suggest the surgeon where all the implants are required. So this is called a prosthetically or prosthodontically driven solution. This is the best way. So after the prosthodontist tells you where exactly you need and how many implants are necessary for a particular patient, then you examine those areas. If there is enough bone for the implant placement, we will straight away go ahead. If you find there is less width or height of bone in that area suggested by the prosthodontist, this is time you should go in for a bone grafting or bone augmentation. Then you place the implant and then you call back the prosthodontist after the implants are done, integrated, to finish the case, to give a prosthesis. That's the best way. Prosthetically driven solutions are the best always.
So you would ideally recommend involving a prosthodontist
Yes,
right from the planning
yes,
stage?
right from the planning, yes.
Yes, sir. And will it be helpful in cases where you will have to evaluate for smile line and alveolectomy if required? Would you suggest constructing a complete denture prior to placement of implants, sir? Will
Yes,
that be?
obviously, yes. Sometimes they will be very helpful in decision making, like whether the patient will require cementable PFM processes or a hybrid kind of denture. There is acrylic and then metal bar and the plastic teeth. So this kind of decisions also they can help us, which will suit the patient better. So involving a prosthodontist, I think it is very important right from the beginning, the planning itself.
Can you move to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish.
So implant placements in the anterior mandible are considered generally safe. Is it because the incisive nerve atrophies post-extraction? Your view on this, sir?
Okay. Yes, yes, Harish. It is relatively safe compared to the other areas because there are not many or not very important anatomical structures, as everybody is aware of. Of course, there will be incisive canal, which will carry the incisive branches, the nerve and the vessels. If you damage the incisive branch of the inferior alveolar nerve, there will be some kind of numbness in that area, local area, but there is no lip paresthesia. So the patient is not too very concerned, even if the nerve is damaged in the incisal region. Another thing, blood vessels in the incisive canal region, even if we damage the canal vessels by our implant or with the drill bits, these vessels are smaller and they can stop bleeding spontaneously or after placement of the implants. So we need not worry about the bleeding also. So most of the concern in the mandible is related to the inferior alveolar canal and the contents of it. So between the mental foramen and mental foramen, we are very safe. There are not very significant structures, so we can straight away go ahead and do the implants. The only thing to be taken caution, especially when we use the basal implants, where we'll be penetrating the lingual cortex intentionally. In those kind of cases, by mistake, if the drill bit slips too deeper inside, it can enter into the sublingual space and even deeper into the substance of the tongue to cause a severe bleeding. So this can become an emergency, causing hematoma of the floor of the mouth. Sometimes the hematoma spreads even to the parapharyngeal spaces, causing respiratory embarrassment. So only in this situation, we need to be careful. Otherwise, especially the bone in the lower anterior region is D1 kind of bone, which is very good for beginners also. So lower anterior region, it's in direct vision, very good quality bone, less anatomical structure. That is the safest area for implant practice.
Sir, in cases where there is a hematoma in the sublingual region,
yes,
apart from the extremity of performing a tracheostomy, can anything be done in the chair, sir, chair side as soon as you see a hematoma being formed? Do we have any options, sir?
Hematoma, if it is in the beginning stage, if we have noted, then the ideal thing will be to make a release incision in the floor of the mouth and evacuate the hematoma. That is in the initial stages. But if it has already spread along the parapharyngeal spaces and causing respiratory embarrassment, do not wait to release the hematoma or evacuate the hematoma. Directly go in and secure the airway by doing a tracheostomy. So it all depends upon the time of your notice. So if you find out early, then you go for evacuation, attempt evacuation. Otherwise, you better go for securing the airway by tracheostomy because it becomes an emergency.
Do you recommend reflecting a full thickness mucoperiosteal flap and placing a periosteal elevator on the lingual side so as to prevent the drill bit inadvertently perforating? Is that a possibility, sir? Can you advise that?
Yeah, that is helpful, but the problem is we don't want to raise too deep inside because raising a mucoperiosteal flap, total full thickness flap itself will cause a lot of resorption later in the bone. So we, especially in basal implants, they don't even raise the flap. They go through the mucosa with the drill bits. So it is almost like a blind technique. So there is more chances for injury when we use a basal implants. And in our conventional implants, usually we don't try to perforate. So most of the times we don't have any problem with the conventional implants. Basal implants, we have a small danger. We need to be careful. But raising a flap, protecting it is actually not necessary because we are doing some stripping and there can be some bone resorption later.
Can you go to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Sir, can you mention few recent advances as far as implantology is concerned with respect to digital planning?
Okay. From the time of introduction of implants, I think there is a constant progress, maybe in the material on which the implant is made, regarding the components, regarding the surgical technique, regarding the armamentarium, or regarding the concepts. So there's so many things, but I would say a constant improvement has been made in the software planning to to create surgical gates so that we can actually place the implant how it should be, very ideally. That is straight implants. When we place multiple implants, we can retain the parallelism between implants. And now, you know, the implants need not be straight all the time because you are all familiar with the all on four concept. So there is a constant change in the concept of there is a paradigm shift. So everybody is familiar with the all on four techniques where the posterior implants are actually tilted. So the concept of straight implants is slowly disappearing. And if wherever possible, we'll go for parallel implants, but wherever it is not possible, tilted implants will come to our rescue. And now the labs can give us customized patient specific root form implant or even subperiosteal implants and abutments. So all that is a progress. Now, instead of titanium, people have started making implants in the zirconia, which is very, very good in osseointegration. Even if there is a bone resorption or a gingival recession, the metal color of the titanium is not there with the zirconia implants. That is another good progress. The recent most progress is navigation system. So in the navigation system, what we do is we just have to feed the CT scan data of the patient, and then you start doing the implant. You don't require a surgical gate here because the handpiece is receiving the navigation data all the time. So when you start entering into the bone, the handpiece gives a feedback to the navigation system, and the navigation gives data to the handpiece, and in the monitor you will know like whether you are going in the right direction or not. So if you have to change the direction, the monitor will tell you. So it is a real-time navigation. It is very useful. Of course, a little bit expensive to invest, but it is very good. It will save a lot of time. You don't need to make a surgical guide. That's the advantage. So a lot of progress in implantology.
Just a point about navigation, sir.
Yes,
As
Harish.
far as mandible is concerned, since it is a movable bone, do you
Yes.
think navigation be more accurate, sir? Because it is not stable, the movement can be still there. As a maxillary stable bone, can be a bit more accurate. Is it that way, sir?
Yes, it is possible because the navigation system will relate the points in the bone. So even if the mandible moves, it will be relating points in the anterior mandible, posterior mandible like that. So the spatial relationship will be still maintained by the navigation system. So usually there is no problem, even with the mandible. We can go ahead.
Shall we go to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish. Yes.
So what is the role of 3D printing in dental implant placement?
Okay.
And
3D
its
printing,
implications?
yeah, that also is a very good progress in implantology. It helps in a lot of ways. So first of all, we can plan the number of implants, the angulation of implants, especially when we do multiple or full arch implants. And the positioning can be decided through the 3D printed models. And it is very helpful to print a surgical guide, which makes our life very easier. Even flapless cases we can do through that. And I would recommend to print a model for all the cases wherever you are doing more number of implants, more than one implant. It's always good for our implant placement and later prosthetic prosthesis making. And this 3D printed models also can be used as an educational tool to the patient. We can explain these are the problems in your mouth, so we need this many implants, and it will come out like this, and you'll have a teeth from this area to this area. So another use of 3D model is it is an educational tool.
Sir, one more question which I have related to this 3D printed model is,
Yes,
in
sir.
cases where there is flabby tissue, sir, now how
Okay.
far is the accuracy, how far will it be replicated, sir? Because the
Okay.
few technicians, what they do is they scan the model and superimpose it over CT scan. So what is your
Yes.
take on that, sir?
Harish, we have tooth supported gates and tissues, I mean bone supported gates.
Yes, sir.
So if you have some teeth remaining, the job is very easy. We can make a tooth supported drill, I mean the surgical gates, easy to secure, easy to make and easy to secure. Only in case of total edentulosum, we will be needing better support. So when you raise a flap, use a bone guided surgical guide. So what they will give a anchor pin. Okay, so after you elevate the flap, you fix the guide and then fix it with an anchor pin with 2-3 anchor pins. Then it will be stable. So you don't need to worry about the soft tissues coming inside.
Sure, sir.
Did it
Thank
answer your question?
Yes, sir.
or-
Yes, sir. It has
Okay.
addressed my issue. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Can I go to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish, yes.
Sir, what is auto transplantation, and kindly mention its applications?
Okay. Tooth autotransplantation is a surgical movement of a tooth from one place to another place in the same patient. Okay, so we are moving a tooth bud or a tooth from one side to another side in the same mouth. That's the literal meaning of a tooth autotransplantation. So why are we discussing autotransplantation in the implants? So whenever you have a missing tooth, we think of giving a partial denture or fixed partial denture or an implant. But this also has to be, this is ignored many a times. This also has to be considered. Like if you find a patient is requiring extraction of lower second molar, when you want to extract, usually we will suggest you go for an implant or a removable partial denture. These are the only two possibilities. But in the same patient, if you look at the X-ray, if there is a developing or developed third molar, probably in that case, you remove second molar and then remove the third molar and keep it in the second molar socket and then do a splinting. This is the autotransplantation process. So the discussion on autotransplantation at the moment in the forum of implantology is to signify that there is an alternative option for implants and bridge. That is, the patient's own tooth can be transferred to this. Of course, it was very, very unpredictable those days. Now, after so much of research, the success of autotransplantation is becoming more and more predictable. Sometimes we use this autotransplantation for the upper incisors, keeping the lower premolar, forming lower premolar teeth. Sometimes we can auto transplant the lower third molar into the first or second lower molar. All that is possible. So these can act as an alternative to your implant. So the cost factor is less and there is no foreign body involved here. That's the advantage.
Thank you, sir. Shall we go to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish.
Sir, after the pilot drill, can we change the direction of successive drills? If yes, how? And if no, why?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, whenever you do an implant, after making a pilot drill preparation, always take a check X-ray with the pilot drill in place to see the depth of the drill and to see the orientation of the drill. This is essential. You could have done 500,000 cases, but still, I prefer to take an X-ray after every pilot drill in my practice, even today. So now we will know the depth of the drill. So you can be sure that you are not inside the maxillary sinus or you are not violating the inferior alveolar canal. That's one use. Second is look at the angulation of the drill, whether the drill is parallel to the adjacent tooth or it is deviated. If it is if the angulation is deviated, you can change the angulation because all the kits will have a pilot drill of 2 millimeter diameter only. But most of the times we are placing an implant which will be 3.5, 4, 4.5 or even larger. So with your subsequent drills, what you have to do is if the angulation is like this, if you want to make it straight, so you apply pressure on the opposite side so that the drill bit becomes straighter, parallel to the adjacent tooth with your subsequent drills. So after your 2, you will usually use a 2.5, then 3, 3.5, 4. You will be sequentially enlarging. So it is possible to change the direction of the osteotomy preparation if you find the pilot drill has gone in a wrong direction. And I'm reminding you, this is the last chance. Like if you have done all the drills and if you keep the final drill and take an X-ray, if there is a problem in the angulation, that cannot be corrected. So pilot drill is a good chance to know the direction and to change the direction.
So would you recommending making an initial osteotomy to the complete depth of the pilot drill or half the way, sir? If you're planning
complete.
for
Complete depth. Yes, it is mandatory to go to the fullest depth. Yes. Okay. Then only when you take an X-ray, you will be very sure that you are not inside the sinus or you are violating the inferior alveolar nerve canal. So you should go to the full depth.
Full. Okay.
Yes.
So shall we go to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish. Yes.
So what is the number of implants required to replace an entire arch? What is your take on this?
So generally, in my practice, I follow 6 implants practice per arch. 6 implants is always better. The longevity of the dentures are going to be better. But then now, after the introduction of the tilted implant concepts, so they can replace the entire arch using only 4 implants. So this is the all-on-4 concept and the Mallow bridge. You are all familiar with it. So to replace an arch, even 4 implants are adequate. But I would recommend 6 implants to a minimum. If you have enough bone, these all-on-4 concepts, basal implants, are introduced only to salvage compromised cases. But if you have good amount of bone from molar to molar, it will be best to place at least 6 implants per arch to have a better stability, to avoid cantilever, and to obtain a good longevity of the implant and the prosthesis.
In case of molars, if you find an insufficient height, would you
Yes.
recommend going with a shorter implants for all-on-6, or would you prefer an all-on-4?
This is actually the preference by the operating surgeon. Short implants, the study is still on. Okay, so now they have started making 4 millimeter length, 5 millimeter, 6 millimeter. So anything less than 6 is called a short implant. So these implants have a larger diameter but lesser height. So the success story of these short implants is, I think it is yet to be established. So till the time, I think it's better to go for an all-on-4 processes. All-on-4, the success is established.
Sir, as far as all-on-4 is concerned,
Yes.
to what extent will you advise a cantilever, sir? Is a single tooth cantilever okay with you?
Yeah, only one tooth, because
One
the last tilted implant will emerge at the region of the second premolar, and the processes will have only up to the first molar. We don't keep the second molar in all-on-4 processes. Actually, there is a mathematical way of calculating. There is something called an AP spread. Okay, so you measure the AP spread, and then you can have a cantilever 15% of the AP spread, anterior posterior spread. So that is the mathematical calculation you can use, how much cantilever can be given.
Thank you.
So in common words, you extend for one more tooth, that's all. Have the tilted implant in the second premolar region and give the first molar as a cantilever. Do not include the second molar at all in all 4 cases. It's very dangerous.
Yes, sir. It can induce a fracture of the process on a longer run.
Failure, biomechanical failure of the
Biomechanical.
implants is very high when you have too much of cantilever. That's the first and primary concern.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in cases where you have sufficient bone, and as you say, axial 6 axial implants are better.
That is the best, yes.
Best. Okay. Shall we go to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish, yes.
So what is the role of immediate implants?
Immediate implants is becoming very, very popular now. Those days when we had techniques which were not very clear, we were hesitant to do it. But now immediate implants have become very, very predictable, especially for the upper anterior teeth which are visible. So the patients are also very demanding nowadays. So if the patient needs an extraction of the upper anterior tooth, or if, due to trauma, if the upper anterior tooth is lost, please go for immediate implant, because you all know the concept is on the day of tooth removal, the housing for the implant is the maximum. After that, it keeps shrinking. So the day 1, that is on the day of tooth removal, you have the maximum volume or the housing of the bone. So do an implant on the same day. That is the best.
Yes, sir. So how important is maintaining the labial cortical plate, the buccal plate? Do you recommend it is very important, or
yes,
is it
yes, especially in case of immediate implants. Don't take your implant near the labial cortex at all. You leave some gap between the labial cortex and the labial surface of the implant, which is known as a jumping gap. You can also apply some graft, or grafts are not necessary nowadays. So this gap will maintain the labial cortex in the same dimension. But if you keep your implant closer to the labial cortex, because of the stress, the labial cortex starts resorbing. The labial soft tissues also will follow the resorption of the labial bone, and there will be recession of the gingiva. which gives you very bad results later. So maintaining labial cortex is very, very important. Palatal cortex is forgiving. So you can go, or you can even expose 2 or 3 threads on the palatal aspect, but labially, it should be well inside, both apically as well as palatally.
What is your view on partial extraction therapy, sir? PET technique. Partial extraction technique where you leave some amount of root intentionally. So on the labial aspect to reduce the.
Yes. That concept is there, but this is to leave some labial part of the root adhering to the labial cortex. So we are sure in reality, when you do an implant, we don't know whether the implant is very close to the labial cortex or not. It is very difficult to visualize. So what they do is they will take an aerator kind of burr. They will section little bit of labial cortex. They will extract the rest of the tooth, and a thin slice of labial aspect of the root will be still sticking to the labial cortex. So this is something like an insulating mechanism, so that there is no pressure or we are never close to the labial cortex. Extra precaution, that's all. But technically it is very difficult. So you need some experience. It has some learning curve. The authors, whoever is following this, I have not done it, but I have read in papers, I have listened to the lectures. They say it works very well, but technically it is little demanding.
Yes. Can I go to the next question, sir?
Yes, Harish.
So how to choose regular implants, whether it is an all-on-4 or zygoma implants for maxillary full arch rehabilitation?
Okay.
How do you choose this?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, every implantologist will need this decision making. So first thing what you take is do a baseline investigation. Take an OPG like this.
Okay.
You can divide the zones into 1, 2, and 3. Zone 1 will tell you canine to canine bone. You can see the height of the bone from the alveolar crest to the nasal floor. Zone 2 will have bone in the premolars region. Zone 3 is in the molar regions. So if the patient is coming to you, and if you are lucky, you will have bone in zones 1, 2, and 3. So you can plan your implants, axial implants, as like how we were discussing some six implants in the upper arch. You can place implants in all these zones and you can get away. But if the patient does not have bone in the zone 3, that is in the molars, you have hypernematized sinus. There is bone only in the zone 1 and zone 2. This is the case for all-on-4. Okay, you place straight implants in the zone 1 and tilted implants in zone 2, you can make a prosthesis. But sometimes, extreme resorption cases, you don't have bone in zone 3 as well as in zone 2. There is no bone in the premolar as well as in the molar region. So you have bone only in the anterior or in the incisor or canine to canine region. This is the case for zygoma implants. You place implants in the anterior region and then go for zygoma implant on both sides and then finish the processes. This is how we decide whether this case is good for all-on-4 or a regular implant or a zygoma implant.
In which situations do we go for quad zygomas?
Quad zygomas, when you don't have anterior also, zone 1, 2, 3, all are absent. So we can't place. Zygoma implants are usually complemented by anterior implants. So we need one zygoma on each side, 2 implants or 3 implants in the anterior region. That's a zygoma, single zygoma concept. But sometimes we don't have bone in the zone 1 also.
Yes.
So one zygoma implant on one side has to be complemented by another zygoma implant, which is known as the quad zygoma concept. So 2 zygoma here, 2 zygoma on the other side to make a denture, make a prosthesis.
Thank you, sir. It was wonderful, sir. I think we have completed the session as far as implants are concerned. Thank you. Thank you,
Harish, for that coordination.
Thank you,
very much. Thank you.
Jinton, sir, can we proceed to the next section, sir? Jinton, sir, or Karthik, sir?
Yes, Dr. Harish.
Yes, sir.
Is Naveen sir online?
Naveen,
Yeah, please proceed.
Yeah.
That Naveen is there.
Yes,
Yes, sir. Yes, please proceed.
Yes. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yes,
you are.
Yes, sir. So the first question, as far as kindly provide some inputs on parotid fistula, sir.
Yeah, parotid fistulas. Parotid fistulas basically are communication between the parotid gland through the skin to the exterior. So the most common cause for this is it's usually a complication of parotid surgery or accidental injuries. So what you do, you basically, your first thing is to detect if it is real saliva that is coming out. It can be, from what I heard from my PGs this evening, it can be either ductal fistula. It can be either ductal fistulas or parenchymal fistulas. So basically, the fistula can come because of a perforation from the duct area or the parenchyma itself. So the ductal injuries, as far as I know, I understand this evening, the ductal fistulas are a bit difficult to treat. They are copious and they are difficult to treat, whereas the parenchymal injury, the fistulas which are happening because of the parenchymal injury, usually present with little bit of salivary leakage, and then they are usually manageable with either pressure dressing, anti-silagogues, etc. Now, there is recently, I just heard of a systematic review on use of Botox for salivary fistulas. It seems to be promising. But in extreme situations, I have had heard of situations where they've tried parotidectomy itself to treat a salivary fistula. Yeah, that's it.
Yes,
Harish.
sir, as far as the retromandibular transparotid approach is concerned, can you give me few
Yes.
important key steps wherein we can
Yes.
avoid a fistula? Yes, sir.
Yes, the most important thing in retromandibular transparotid approach is meticulous closure of the parotid fascia after the ORIF procedure. Whatever reason you are approaching the condyle for, once you approach the condyle, you finish your surgery, and then you close back. When you close it, you have to exactly search for the parotid fascia that you incised, and meticulously run a continuous locking suture. And then do your subcutaneous and cutaneous closure. That way, I have never seen parotid fistulas. Only in situations where you do unscrupulous retraction and lose orientation of tissue, so that you're not even able to identify which is parotid fascia that you incise or which is the subcutaneous tissue. When you go to that level, and then you vaguely, bluntly take subcutaneous stitches, then this parotid fistula happens. Number one. Number two is, as a principle, always, whether it is meticulous continuous locking or not, that type of suture, we always want to give the patient a nice tight pressure dressing at least for 48 hours after any retromandibular approach or any periauricular approaches.
So you recommend a watertight closure of the parotid capsules.
Watertight, meticulous. You have to first of all identify the parotid capsule that you incised, because you may get, after a violent retraction, you may get confused. The tissues get tethered. You may get confused between which is parotid fascia and which is subcutaneous tissue over it. You have to differentiate them. Make sure you close the parotid fascia and then close the subcutaneous tissue, then the skin.
Yes, sir. Can we proceed to the next question, sir?
Yes, please, Harish.
Sir, how is a maxillary sinus lift performed? And if the implant is placed after sinus lift, how good is the prognosis? If you can throw light on this, sir.
Yes, maxillary sinus lift, it can be either direct sinus lift done through the osteotomy site, implant osteotomy site, through the alveolus, or an indirect, direct sinus lift is where you open the buccal wall of the alveolus beyond the alveolus on the sinus directly, whereas the indirect sinus lift is done through the implant osteotomy site. Am I right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, that's right.
I hope I'm not confusing.
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. So the lateral window, in other words, the lateral window technique is the direct sinus lift. You directly get access to the sinus, elevate the sinus lining, and then if you're doing a single stage, you start doing the osteotomy, get an implant inside, visualize the implant through the direct sinus lift window, make sure it is primarily stable, and then place bone grafts and close it.
Yes. Yes. And off late, the concept of osteodensification using DensaVerse have also, they have also gained popularity in certain cases where you can avoid a direct sinus lift by itself. Yes,
correct. I heard it's really good. Yes, correct.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I know of some people in Northeast India practicing that very well. I'm sure our people also are doing it.
Yes, sir. Shall we go to the next question, sir?
Please.
So the literature shows in
The survival
yes.
rate. Yes, I remember this question. So the prognosis for maxillary sinus lift and simultaneous implant placement, single stage, is as good as 91.8%. As long as you get primary stability, I come to understand that as long as you get primary stability, even if there is no grafting or PRP or PRF for that matter, if your primary stability is good and you tent the sinus lining, the blood which the clot which forms there itself provides becomes a good bone graft later.
Yes.
In other words, you don't really need autogenous grafts or alloplasts if your primary stability is good.
It's good.
Am I right, Harish?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good, sir. Going on to the next question, sir. Can you please shed light on the detection and differentiation of salivary tumors? How do you detect or diagnose it?
Clinically, they all present as very slow growing lumps, extremely slow growing lumps if they're benign, and a sudden change in the rate of growth expansion, that they are classical malignant ones. If they are encroaching into nerves, they have present with numbness of the region, or have muscle weakness and persistent pain in the area of salivary gland. There can be reduced salivary flow and trouble in opening mouth widely because it's in around the periauricular area. As far as imaging is concerned, MRI is gold standard to identify the course of the facial nerve. It's for more of a surgical interest. Ultrasound is gold standard for basic diagnosis. PET scans you can prescribe for if you're suspecting malignancies. Xylography, FNAC is acceptable. Biopsy for the salivary the parotid gland pathology is the last preferred invasive investigation.
Sure. We go to the next question, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, can you briefly state probably the common set of parotid duct injuries?
Yes. So parotid duct injury. Parotid duct injury happens in 3 places. One is before the masseter, that is the posterior to the masseter. One is just over the masseter, that part of the parotid duct.
Okay,
or the other one is the distal end, where it almost drains into the buccal mucosa. So that part of, if in case the only difficult part to treat is the middle part, where it is over the masseter. If there's an injury over the masseter of the parotid duct over the masseter region, that apparently is difficult to treat. Okay, this injury can be a laceration or a ductal exposure or total cutting or crushing of the duct. Okay, so how you manage is to first of all cannulate and see if there is a genuine laceration or discontinuity causing a leak. Cannulate it with silicone cannulas and check if it is genuine real duct injury. Then you, if you just identified it, go for immediate duct repair, or you ligate the proximal cut end, or you can do fistulization of the parotid duct. Basically, what happens is it's like xyloductoplasty. You fistulize it. You open it out into the oral cavity. You create a new parotid papilla-like opening in a different area in the buccal mucosa and allow it to drain that, and leave the distal end to atrophy itself.
Sir, in case if we can visualize the direct duct injury, is there a possibility of placing a stent, a silicone stent, and doing a suture?
Yes. If you are able to visualize the proximal and the distal ends, you may place a stent.
Okay.
Provided it doesn't, provided you take good care of asepsis and infection control later.
Sure. Yes. Can you go to the next question, sir?
Yes, please.
So can you please elaborate FES sinus procedure?
FES, I don't know why our PGs have curiously asked about an exclusive ENT procedure. I'm not sure if, basically from FES, I understand very clearly that I am not sure unless you finish your MS ENT otolaryngology. I'm not sure how many of you will practice FES after your MBS. But just for your information, FES is functional endoscopic sinus surgery. It basically was introduced as a treatment of choice for treating chronic sinusitis. I think maxillary sinusitis The last thing to treat, I mean, the most technically difficult to treat, from what I hear from my ENT colleagues, is the frontal sinusitis management. Basically, what they do is do an uncinectomy. They go to the middle meatus and the anterior-inferior end of the middle meatus. They do an uncinectomy, gain access into the sinus, from which they go straight up and clear up the maxillary sinus, ethmoidal sinus, and the frontal sinus as the last thing. Now, one small thing I learned is that why you select the anterior-inferior portion to gain access is because if you go slightly posterior, you end up injuring the nasolacrimal duct. Nasolacrimal duct is traveling straight just posterior to this area, all the way from up from the eye into the nose. So if you have to try to keep your entrance access preparation as anterior as possible, so that you avoid injury to nasolacrimal duct. Yeah, I think that's.
So we can reduce the chance of epiphora, sir.
Yeah, of course, yes. The last thing you want to do is the patient having epiphora following a FS surgery.
Yes.
It's very difficult to treat it with diaphragm sternostomy later.
Sir, in case of inadvertent placement of the implant or the tooth root into the sinus, can we use FES to recover it? Is it possible, sir?
FES, yeah. I mean, see, a simple, straightforward approach would be a Caldwell loop.
Caldwell loop.
FES can be used. I'm sure FES can be used to locate it. I'm not sure if you can retrieve any. I mean, maybe you can. I think no, like an endoscope. Maybe there are scopes with a retrieval tool, which you can use to retrieve. I'm sure.
Maybe if we cannot, yes, if we find it difficult to locate an implant or a foreign body in sinus through a conventional Caldwell loop, probably we can refer to.
I'm sure. Yeah. But it has a good visualization as well as retrieval instruments. I'm sure you can try that. Yes.
Sure, sir. Sir, can you go to the next question, sir?
Please, yes.
Yeah. So can you highlight the management of Frey syndrome, sir?
Frey syndrome. See, Frey syndrome is basically, from what I understand, Frey syndrome is common in patients following periauricular surgery, especially parotidectomy or superficial parotidectomy. So what happens is, consider a right tridectomy approach, exposure of the parotid gland, and do a superficial parotidectomy and leave the facial nerve intact. And then when you suture the flap back, the facial nerve comes in very close proximity directly under the skin.
Yes.
So these kind of patients apparently go through a Frey syndrome. So I heard from my PG Sudan this evening that he's seen a very good way to handle Frey syndrome following these kind of periauricular surgeries. What they do, they elevate the flap, remove the tumor, and put either a fat fascia graft or facial lata cover over the facial nerve, and then suture the flap back. They put a huge bulk of fat fascia graft. Though it appears like a huge swelling temporarily, it is a good option to get the facial nerve away from a very thin skin flap. Now, okay, leave that, and then you leave a thin flap over the facial nerve, and you end up with Frey syndrome. The simpler ways of handling it is to use topical antiperspirant, anti-sweating drugs. I mean, anti-sweating agents. You can use 20% aluminum chloride for about 1 to 2 months. Or systemically, you can try. Topically, you can also try. Apparently, topical glycopyrrolates are available, anticholinergic. You can try them. Botox, botulinum A toxin is useful. The last resort becomes either auricular temporal nerve resection, or even worse crime will be to radiate the particular salivary gland, parotid.
So the basic concept is that you prevent direct contact of the facial nerve with intact skin. And
yes.
You wind the interpositional graft kind of maybe.
Yes, either a fat fascia graft or facial lata is preferable.
Okay, sir. Go to the next question, sir. This is a picture of the starch iron test. If you can briefly explain. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Go to the next question.
Yes, please.
Sir, can you provide the indication and procedure about nasal antrostomy?
Nasal antrostomy, yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so basically,
yes, sir.
Go for it, yes.
Once you finish it, I can come to the next section of the question.
Yeah, sure. So basically, nasal antrostomy, any maxillary sinus procedure chronic sinusitis, you gain access either through Caldo-Look or FES, and completely curate the sinus, remove the lining, clean it up, and pack it, assuming you pack it with an antibacterial pack, a big pack or something like that. The original port of drainage for maxillary sinus is from the middle meatus. But in case of post surgery, in case you don't want inflammatory or infectious fluid to get accumulated to the sinus, it has to accumulate all the way to the middle meatus, only then it can drain out. Okay, you don't want that much time to waste. So you are basically creating an opening much below in level with the maxillary sinus itself, so that in case if some infectious fluid gets accumulated, it can drain off instantly. You don't have to collect all the way to the middle meatus. So that is why I think we all perform a nasal enterostomy. Even that, how do you do it? You basically create an ostium, you opening in the anterior part. Like for example, I heard that you divide the epi-distance of the inferior turbinate into 3 parts. Okay, you make the enterostomy in the first part itself, in the anterior part itself, because like I told you previously, if I like for FES, if you go into the middle part, you have a high chance of injuring the nasolacrimal duct. So you try to create the opening. It's a blunt opening in the inferior meatus, anterior part of the inferior meatus, and this opening will be created into the maxillary sinus. Why you do that? You want to provide a maxillary sinus with a drainage at a much lower level.
So apart from infections, what is your take on marsupialization for cysts, maxillary cyst? Does that work well, sir?
Marsupialization for maxillary cysts?
Yes, sir. In case of huge cyst in the maxillary posterior region, and you want to marsupialize it, before.
Yeah, of course you can. Why not?
Yes, sir.
Sure, you can it's much better actually.
Much better.
Because you don't encroach into why you don't violate in an attempt to enucleate, you don't violate and cause an opening into the sinus unnecessarily.
Okay. The next part of the question, sir, how does a maxillary sinus perforation heal, and what is the time required for it?
See, maxillary sinus perforations, yes, they heal within 4 to 6 weeks.
Yes.
If you are using a bone graft and a membrane to cover the defect, it heals 6 months. This is one story.
Yes,
but I also heard that in case if they're asked, what they meant was healing of a maxillary sinus discontinuity, like for example, a Le Fort 1 osteotomy, a Le Fort 1 trauma, something like that.
Yes.
Apparently, it takes about 4 to 6 months to completely heal by the ectomation. The mesodermal tissues directly chip in, and they provide direct healing.
Okay.
In about 4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months. Okay, sir.
Yeah.
And the last part of the question is the components of nasal decongestion therapy and the mechanism of
Sorry,
action.
just one before I
Yes,
move on to the thing.
Yes, sir.
I also want to share one interesting thing that I learned today. Is
yes,
that
sir, please, sir.
the apparently the Le Fort 1 osteotomies or injuries that we encounter, we're always wondering how the Le Fort 1 but see, we know the mandible buttresses itself when you plate it, whereas
Yes,
maxilla does not always buttress very accurately in its position. So we are always wondering how it heals. Apparently, because it being a part of the upper respiratory tract, there is always a negative pressure in that area. This negative pressure, the tension caused by the negative pressure, is the one which helps in osteodeposition and bone formation in the maxilla. So that is why within 4 to 6 weeks, whether you treat it rigidly or not, its maxilla is going to heal, apparently.
Yes, sir.
That's a nice thing that I learned.
Yes, sir. That's a good information, sir. The last part, you know, the components of nasal decongestion therapy and the mechanism of action, sir.
Yeah. They're all basically they're either topical or nasal sprays. The active ingredients are pseudoephedrine or phenylephrine. Oxymetazoline apparently causes dependence, so you preferably avoid oxymetazoline and prefer the other agents. They are basically sympathomimetic agents, and they bind to receptors and enhance the release of norepinephrine, which produces vasoconstriction. But this vasoconstriction will decrease blood flow to the nasal mucosa and results in shrinkage of tissue. But it does cause rebound vasodilatation. Once its effect is over, it suddenly causes rebound vasodilatation, and the whole symptoms can all start all over again. Yes, how long this lasts is the key. That is the time it provides comfort.
Yes, thank you, sir. So that rebound is very important. The rebound,
Rebound,
base.
correct.
Yes, sir.
I heard that. Yes. Correct.
That is why, because of the nasal, they feel more of nasal stuffiness again even after administration of nasal decongestants.
Correct. I
Yes,
think
sir.
the only till it lasts is that after that, that's why maybe they become dependent on it.
Yeah, sure, sir. Yes, sir. So we come to the end of the questions, sir. It was wonderful
Super.
talking to you. Thank you for valuable input, sir.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Harish. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
sir.
Thank you, Jimson
So
sir.
Dr.
Thanks
Jimson,
to
sir,
the
Dr.
organizers.
Karthik, sir, over to you, sir.
Dr. Ilvinil.
Dr. Harish,
Yes, sir.
we have a few questions.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. I will be happy to take it over. Sir, can you just elaborate about sinus regimen? The Andrel regimen or sinus regimen? Naveen, sir, if you're there. Naveen, sir? I think Naveen, sir, is not.
Or probably that there is a question on implants. You could
Yeah.
direct it to Suresh, sir.
Yeah, Suresh, sir. Sir, are you there, sir?
Hello. Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
here. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Suresh, sir.
Yeah,
Sir,
yeah.
we have a question related to indirect sinus lift.
Yeah, tell.
For indirect sinus lift, after pilot drill,
Okay.
kindly mention the sequence of drills to be used for implant placement.
Sequence of drills. Okay. In indirect sinus lift, we are approaching through the crest, as
Yes,
Naveen had just explained. So after the pilot drill, is sequentially enlarged like a normal implant placement. For example, if we are going to use a 4 millimeter diameter implant, and after the 2 millimeter pilot drill, you go for 2.5. But look at the length of the bone that is available. Make it 2 millimeter short of it. Suppose if the patient has only 8 millimeter height in that area, you prepare only 6 millimeters. Okay, the pilot drill goes up to 6 mm of depth, then the 2.5 again 6 mm only, and the 3 mm 3.5. So you stop with the last, that is the last drill for the 4 millimeter diameter implant. You stop, and then you have something called indirect sinus lift osteotomes. Okay, so after you finish all the drills, use this one to penetrate inside. You have to gently tap it so that a circular bone in the end of the preparation is fractured and it lifts the sinus membrane also upwards. So whatever length you need, like 2 millimeter or 4 millimeter, the limitation for indirect sinus lift is only 2 to 4 millimeter, not more than that. So the end of this drilling sequence, you have to use an indirect sinus lift osteotome. Then you finish the preparation. Then you drive the implant. So the sequence is the same for any normal implant, but it stops 2 millimeters short of the available height.
So you prefer an understage osteotomy, sir? For
in pertaining to the length.
Length. Okay.
Yes.
Pertaining to length.
Yes.
So and the maximum is that you can do an indirect sinus lift is around 2 to 3 mm, sir?
2 to 4 millimeter is the maximum. Beyond that, we are very much prone to violate the sinus membrane. There will be a tear.
Okay.
Yeah, that is the limitation.
Okay. Ma'am, has the question been answered? No?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
So would you like to take that question on sinus regimen, sir?
I don't know, like it is not very clear to me also, sinus regimen. I think Dr. Ilvinil can answer herself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So sinus regimen is basically the protocol that you follow after you have completed any procedure violating the sinus. So this would include those treatment protocols that would reduce inflammation and subsequent congestion of the sinus.
Okay.
So this would include placing the administering antibiotics to reduce subsequent infection, anti-inflammatory agents because you want to reduce the secretion in the sinus, decongestants, and sometimes saline lavage also because you want to keep the maxillary sinus absolutely infection and inflammation free. Because this would, if this is not taken care of, the patient would land up with chronic sinusitis or acute sinusitis. So basically, this is to address those problems related to post-surgery involving the maxillary sinus. So that covers that.
I was thinking of the acute management, that is at the time of sinus lifting. If you damage the membrane, what is done?
Usually,
I thought that is the sinus regimen.
Okay,
Okay, sir.
sir, even while doing a sinus lift, if we have a small perforation,
Yes.
maybe a tiny perforation, I think it is fine, sir. Beyond a certain level, they use
A membrane.
collagen membrane.
Yes.
Collagen membrane and
Yeah.
achieving a watertight closure.
Yeah, suturing the sinus membrane is almost not possible.
Not possible.
Yeah, so we have to keep a membrane, and below that you keep the bone graft and
Bone
then
graft.
close. Yes.
Close it, sir.
Thanks, Venil. Lavanya.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
sir.
very much.
Thank you, madam. Ma'am, have you?
Mrinalini?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
yes, Harish.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Harish. Thank you. Thank you
Thank you,
very
ma'am.
much.
Thank you for your. Thank you, Suresh, sir. Thank you, Naveen, sir.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Harish.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jimson, for the wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Karthik.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all. That
you.
concludes yet another highly informative session. On behalf of the organizing team, I would like to thank the mentors as well as our moderator for providing us their valuable time to help residents gain a better understanding of the topics. We look forward to seeing all the participants again during session 4 to be held on Monday, the 12th of April. Kindly fill out the feedback form that will be posted in the chat box shortly. A minimum participation in 8 out of 11 sessions is mandatory to get a certificate. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'm posting the feedback format. I request the participants to log in and give your feedback.
Can you make the announcement about the next session?
Yes, sir, it has been done.
Jimson, they just told it is on
Oh,
Monday.
sorry.
That's fine.
It's on Monday, right?
Monday.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. It's on Monday, the 12th of April, 8 p.m. And the topic is on trauma. Mid-face, upper face, mandible, and soft tissue, sir.
The mentors and moderators?
Sir, the moderator is Dr. Deepak, sir. And the mentors are Dr. KK Raja, sir. And Dr. Vikraman, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Students, please remember that you should have attended a minimum of 8 sessions for you to receive your certificates. So please.
And unlike last year, this year it will be an individual certificate for each session.
Sure, sir.
Last year we gave away only one certificate, but this year it will be individual certificates for each session.
So are we done, James?
Yes, Suresh?
Okay. So we leave now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good
Great
night.
job.
See you soon.
Wonderful,
Bye-bye.
wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
Suresh.
Good
Thank you,
night, sir.
Naveen. Thank you,
Okay.
the team behind the Ask Your Mentor, Karthik, Ilavenil, Mrinalini, Melita, and everyone. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, sir. Good night, sir.
Thank you,
Night, sir.
Chandru. Thank you, Chandru.
Dr. Harish, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful,
you, sir. Thank you,
wonderfully
sir.
conducted. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Students, you have a few more minutes to complete your feedback.